Greetings, everyone. This is a video I hadn't planned on doing, but it's more of a response to some of the comments I received on my Why I Am a Christian video. And one of the comments said that religion is perpetuated because it depends upon brainwashing and cult-like methods. And I can't say I disagree with this, but what perplexes me is that some of the unbelievers I've heard have stated that it is the duty of a human being to free themselves from the shackles of religion, and this is not only preferred but required for humanity to progress. Now, this may well be true, but my argument is that having faith in certain circumstances represents a more moral choice, even if it comes at the cost of having the ability to choose one's own belief system. Keep in mind, few of us live in a vacuum, in a circumstance where we are truly free to act upon our own conclusions. And this is not the rule, but rather the exception to the rule. And being able to accept faith or deny faith solely on the basis of one's own spiritual conclusions is a luxury that a lot of people don't have. Most atheists or agnostics have become that way because they have had free-thinking parents who encourage them to come to whatever conclusion they might desire. If you go and you ask children from fundamentalist households, they will tell you that that's not the case. Now, don't mistake this for I believe because it pleases my parents argument, because it isn't that. A belief for the sake of simply having a belief will eventually out itself, because no one can live a double life. My argument is that factoring in parental expectations, especially when the sole expectation is the continuance of the faith, in your decision to have faith is sometimes more moral than pursuing intellectual integrity based solely upon individual motivations. Now, when it comes to people in my position, people who have loving families, who have sacrificed and continue to sacrifice everything they have for their children, I see it as a personal duty to respond to their expectation of having faith, especially since this is the only possible way for me to meet their expectation. Now, is this intellectually dishonest? Well, that's the danger in this predicament, but I don't think it is. I'm essentially faced with two choices: to either be a Christian or become an agnostic. My church and my community are very conservative. With all this in mind, if I would have chosen to follow my own inclinations and become an agnostic, or I could have become a Christian, but keep in mind that I don't have their life experience, and my inclinations, my own conclusions, are the result of being in an environment that is completely different from their own. I've never had to live by faith or live with the thought that however evil the men or hopeless the situation, one cannot give up hope, but one must stand firm for justice because God does exist, and God, even though he might seem distant, God has a purpose in a judgment that will be revealed one day. Thus, I cannot fully trust my own skepticism because it is the result of living in prosperity and stability and freedom. How would I react if my prosperity, my stability, and my freedom were taken away? Would I still have been able to be a skeptic, or would I have turned to faith, not only because it was the only answer to the injustice around me, but because it was the only thing that could encourage others who were experiencing the same thing as myself? What if others depended on myself for encouragement and despair and I couldn't provide it? I don't know. I don't think anybody can know until they're placed in a similar situation. Now, my parents' faith is literally the strongest bond I have with my family. It defines who we are. And like I mentioned before, my community is pretty cohesive. Everyone behaves the same way, votes the same way, has the same opinions regarding a whole bunch of things, and pretty much marries with someone from within that community. And the only exceptions I know are those of a guy and a girl who, after going to college, came out as atheists to their parents, to the church, and to their friends. And they were very honest about their decision. They just could no longer believe. They didn't see enough evidence. Many unbelievers would say, wow, this is an act of courage. This is an act of liberation. It's, rugged Ayn Rand objectivism personified, if you will. The truth wins out over superstition. But that's not the whole story. This act was not done in a vacuum. This affected the community, a community that was scarred from experiencing persecution together. And the only time I saw the church as affected and troubled was when a tragic accident occurred when a couple of adults died. Now, this is also tragic in their eyes. It wasn't about just the act of turning their backs to God. Because if that was the case, then there was still the possibility of returning to God. This was a lot worse. These people no longer believed in God. And to them, this was just unfathomable. How could they not believe in a God when it was God and only God who sustained and preserved us during times of trouble? Perhaps the biggest impact was upon the families of the two. These families are basically remain in a state of depression. And I know that my parents would probably react in the same way. Maybe I should disregard this because no one should base their existence upon the expectations of another. Our lives are our own and our destinies must be fulfilled by our own decisions. But one cannot ignore that sometimes this is the wrong path to take. When people have reached their limits for pain and suffering, the last thing anyone who loves them should do is cause them even greater pain and suffering. And my choice is made out of love for my parents, and I accept my heritage of faith, but I believe that submitting myself to their standard of judging their existence is really a necessary decision. Now, I might not believe like they believe, but I believe because of them and because of what I've seen them do because of their faith. So I'm kind of taking them at their word that faith is important and does exist. Now, perhaps I've never had the opportunity to have the same faith because I was never placed in extreme circumstances. But being able to reject faith is not only a luxury for me, it's an option that brings with it numerous undesirable consequences, those of parental disappointment, and because they were unable to transmit their most important quality to their children, their faith. Now, if I am to claim that I stand on the side of goodness, I have to make a sacrifice. I must sacrifice my own experience and my own standard of judging the world in favor of adopting a viewpoint that is foreign in many ways, because that viewpoint is the only dam that holds back a torrent of bitterness, disappointment, and existentialist despair on behalf of my family and my community. So I don't really have a choice, and I can be envious of those that have this choice, but I can't be ignorant of it. I don't live in a vacuum, and my choices are not solely my own because they don't affect just myself. In many regards, showing love to others equates to sacrifice. Love is very pleasant when you're the recipient, but it's very difficult when you have to return it, because one has to overcome their own nature to perform what is essentially an unnatural act. That of putting someone else before yourself. Showing my love to my family equates to having faith, and given that I have no other avenue of expressing my love, this is essentially my only option. And not just myself, but countless other people in my situation. Now, for this reason, I have to acknowledge and acquiesce to my parents' reverence for faith, however confused and troubled I might be on the matter. No one chooses whom they're born to or what religion they're born into, but we all choose how we respond to the hand we're dealt. While some, perhaps the majority of people, have the freedom to truly live their lives solely in accordance with their intellectual convictions, this is not the case for everyone, and dare I say, it is sometimes the wrong path to take depending on the context those choices are made in. Life is made of tough choices. Many people relegate these choices to the areas of potential careers, potential spouses, financial decisions, but they often overlook the area of faith because they assume that people make such decisions on their own without any consideration for the context they exist in. But such decisions extend into this area for me and for many others as well. Ultimately, if you believe the virtue of love trumps that of intellectual integrity, I don't see how you can have any other choice if you were placed in a similar situation. Now, you can fault me for my choice, at least my choice up until this point, because who knows what the future holds. So you can fault me for my choice, because that is your prerogative. But I just wanted to give you an insight into why faith is a better choice, perhaps the only moral choice in my case and other people placed in similar circumstances I am, as opposed to unbelief.